On March 22, 1933, in the German town of Dachau, the first Nazi concentration camp began operating. What started as a tool to imprison political opponents soon evolved into something far more terrifying. Over the following years, Nazi Germany created a vast network of camps across occupied Europe, a system that turned imprisonment into organized, systematic mass murder. Millions of people passed through camps with different purposes: detention, forced labor, and extermination. In just the first 3 years after Hitler came to power, around 90 concentration camps were established in Germany alone to suppress so-called enemies of the regime. Inside them, people were tortured, killed, and subjected to medical and sexual experiments. Age and gender offered no protection. How did this monstrous machinery of death actually function? Did prisoners know what awaited them upon arrival? And finally, what can be found today on the sites of the former Nazi camps? This video is strictly educational. Preserving accurate historical knowledge is essential, not only to remember what humans are capable of, but to recognize the warning signs and draw the lessons history demands. That's why in this video, the camps are presented in the chronological order of their establishment, and we will also explore whether it is possible to visit them today. Before we turn to the camps themselves, it is important to understand how the Nazi camp system came into being. The first concentration camps in Germany were established shortly after the Nazis came to power in January 1933. Their legal foundation was the decree issued by the Reich President on February 28, 1933, known as for the protection of the people and the state. This decree allowed the authorities to detain suspected enemies of the regime indefinitely without trial. According to Yad Vashem, the history of Nazi concentration camps can be divided into 3 main phases. The first period, from 1933 to 1936, coincided with the consolidation of Nazi power. Initially, camps were used almost exclusively to imprison political opponents, communists, social democrats, and other perceived enemies of the regime. From late 1933 onward, the scope widened to include groups the Nazis labeled as asocial elements, such as the homeless, beggars, and others deemed undesirable. At this stage, the primary goal was the elimination of political opposition, not mass extermination. In the second phase, from 1936 to 1942, most of the early camps were closed, with Dachau as a notable exception and replaced by larger, permanent camps designed to hold growing numbers of prisoners. Among them were Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, Mauthausen, Flossenbürg, Ravensbrück, Mardenegg, Neuengamme, Stutthof, and others. From 1937 onward, forced labor became central to the system. Prisoners were exploited by both the state and private German companies, including on occupied territories. Mass arrests of Jews began in 1938. In the third phase, from 1942 to 1945, extermination camps were established at Chelmno, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Bežec as part of the so-called final solution. Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Majdanek were expanded into major killing centers, while also functioning as hubs of forced labor. At many camps, one could see at the entrance the slogan reflecting SS ideology: Arbeit macht frei, meaning work sets you free. It is one of the most infamous examples of Nazi deception and ideological cynicism, at once a promise, a lie, and a tool of psychological oppression. It was the first thing prisoners saw before their lives were forever changed, serving a single purpose: to break hope before the system broke their bodies. By the early 1940s, concentration camps were no longer an improvised tool of repression. They had become a central pillar of Nazi rule, combining terror, exploitation, and mass murder into a single bureaucratic system. Understanding how this system developed is essential before examining individual camps, because each one reflects a different stage of that evolution. Dachau was the first Nazi concentration camp established in the German town of Dachau, about 16 kilometers northwest of Munich. The camp began operating in March 1933, shortly after Adolf Hitler came to power, and remained in existence until its liberation in April 1945. Over the course of its operation, more than 200,000 prisoners passed through Dachau. According to official records, approximately 30,000 people died. Initially, Dachau was created to suppress political opponents of Nazism and to intimidate the German population into obedience and loyalty to the new regime. It was designed not only as a prison, but as a tool of terror. Heinrich Himmler himself, as head of the Munich police in 1933, described the Dachau camp as follows. The concentration camp at Dachau is intended for the confinement of all communist and, where necessary, ambitions, Reichsbanner and social democratic functionaries who endanger the security of the state. This clearly shows that the camp was initially presented as an instrument of state protection rather than as a site of mass murder. As a result, Dachau became both a training ground for SS guards and a prototype for future Nazi concentration camps. When Dachau opened in 1933, its first prisoners were well-known political opponents of the Nazi regime, primarily communists and social democrats. According to Nazi terminology, they were held in protective custody, detention without trial. Because these prisoners arrived first and understood the camp system better than later arrivals, many of them occupied relatively influential positions within the internal prisoner hierarchy, which was deliberately created and controlled by the SS. Over time, the camp population expanded to include groups targeted by Nazi ideology: Roma and Sinti, Jews, homosexual men, Jehovah's Witnesses who refused military service, clergy who resisted Nazi control over the churches, and many others who dared to criticize the regime. As anti-Jewish persecution intensified, the number of Jewish prisoners grew rapidly. After the Kristallnacht pogroms in November 1938, more than 10,000 German Jews were imprisoned in Dachau. In 1942, following the implementation of the so-called final solution, Jews held in Dachau and other camps within the Reich were deported to extermination camps in occupied Poland. In the summer of 1939, transports carrying several thousand Austrians arrived at Dachau. Throughout the war, prisoners from all occupied European countries were sent there. Among them were Jews, members of resistance movements, clergy, and others who refused to cooperate with Nazi authorities. Dachau was surrounded by an electrified barbed wire fence and a deep, water-filled ditch. Upon arrival, prisoners were stripped of all personal belongings, shaved, and dressed in striped uniforms. Each inmate received a prisoner number and a colored triangle indicating their assigned category, such as Jewish, Roma, homosexual, or political prisoner. The Nazis ruthlessly exploited Dachau prisoners as cheap, expendable labor. In the early years, inmates were forced to build roads, work in quarries, and drain swamps. As the war progressed, weapons production became increasingly important. Thousands of Jews from Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and the Soviet Union were deported to Dachau to work in armaments factories. To house approximately 37,000 prisoners employed in war-related industries, 36 large subcamps were attached to Dachau. Dachau was also a site of brutal medical experiments. SS Dr. Sigmund Rascher conducted high-altitude experiments by placing prisoners in decompression chambers to simulate extreme flight conditions. Klaus Schilling, a specialist in tropical medicine, led malaria experiments in which around 1,000 prisoners were deliberately infected. Other pseudo-scientific experiments included inducing infections and poisoning to test medications, deliberately cutting prisoners to test blood-clotting agents, experiments involving drinking seawater, and tuberculosis research. These experiments caused immense suffering and death. Today, the former concentration camp of Dachau is a memorial and museum open to the public. Each year, approximately 800,000 visitors from around the world come to the site. Admission is free, and the memorial can be easily reached from Munich by public transport or taxi. Visitors can explore the grounds independently, use multilingual audio guides, or join guided tours designed for individual visitors. Buchenwald was established in 1937 by order of the SS to hold political prisoners, as well as Jews, Roma, and sexual minorities considered alien to German society. The camp was located near Weimar and was originally named Ettersberg. The camp was built using the labor of the prisoners, and its name was later changed to Buchenwald, meaning beech forest in German. Unlike Auschwitz, Buchenwald was not a killing factory. It was a labor camp, often called a camp of slow death, where the Nazi principle of extermination through labor was applied. Prisoners were sent to external labor camps which were created from 1942 onward at various German war industries. Buchenwald had a strict system of prisoner categorization. Each group had distinctive badges and was subjected to different levels of discrimination. Jews faced especially harsh treatment, constantly under threat of death. Prisoners were exploited in hard labor for the German war economy. Each day began with endless roll calls, followed by work often in dangerous and exhausting conditions. Companies such as Siemens, Daimler-Benz and IG Farben benefited from free prisoner labor. Prisoners were worked to exhaustion, deprived of food, subjected to disease and abuse, and often died at work or in the barracks, where corpses could remain until morning. Food was minimal, sometimes just a few pieces of bread and thin soup. Sanitary conditions were horrific, and the work itself functioned as both exploitation and a method of slow extermination. Heinrich Himmler, as Reichsführer SS in the 1930s, spoke of Buchenwald as follows: Buchenwald is a camp for political prisoners, an instrument of discipline and order. Its function is to break resistance and re-educate those opposed to the state. This emphasizes that the camp was viewed as a tool of control rather than merely a place of detention. One of the most horrifying aspects of life in Buchenwald was medical experimentation. Prisoners were subjected to experiments without anesthesia or consent, with no purpose other than to test the limits of human endurance. Inmates were deliberately infected with diseases, often in attempts to test vaccines, resulting in hundreds or thousands of agonizing deaths. From 1941 onward, Buchenwald housed Soviets, but also Poles, French, Czechs, Austrians, Belgians, Italians. Virtually every European nationality was represented. According to official records, around 250,000 people passed through Buchenwald, of whom approximately 56,000 perished. These figures represent individual lives, families, and stories destroyed by the system. Buchenwald was liberated by American forces on April 11, 1945, bringing an end to years of terror, forced labor, and death. The memory of Buchenwald endures. A memorial complex was established and opened in 1958. Today, only the cobblestone foundations of the former barracks remain, marking where buildings once stood. Near each foundation, plaques indicate the groups held there. For example, Barrack Number 14, Roma and Sinti, Barrack Number 3, Teenagers, Barrack Number 3, Jews, and so on. The crematorium has been preserved, with plaques bearing the names of victims' relatives embedded in the walls. Observation towers and multiple rows of barbed wire remain intact, as do the camp gates with the notorious inscription, Jedem des Sein, to each his own. This phrase carries a chilling meaning. Each prisoner received exactly what the regime intended for them. Visiting the memorial is free of charge. Buchenwald is located 144 kilometers or 90 miles from Leipzig. From the nearby town of Weimar, the site can be reached by bus in about 20 minutes. In 1944, a German newspaper advertised, "Physically fit female employees aged 20 to 40 are needed for work at a military facility. Good pay, free food, accommodation and clothing are guaranteed." What the announcement did not mention was that the clothing meant SS uniforms, and the facility was actually the women's concentration camp Ravensbrück, about 80 kilometers north of Berlin. The camp's name literally means Raven's Bridge. Ravensbrück was established in spring 1939 near the German town of Fürstenberg by order of Heinrich Himmler. Some women imprisoned in Ravensbrück were resisting the Nazi regime, spies, insurgents, or outspoken supporters of socialism. Others were deemed dangerous simply for their beliefs or scientific work. The camp also held Roma women, prostitutes, so-called Aryan wives of Jews, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Ultimately, the women of Ravensbrück had little in common beyond being prisoners. They came from all over Europe, wherever German forces occupied territory, speaking Russian, French, Polish, Dutch, and other languages. Their social and economic backgrounds, education levels, and religious beliefs varied widely. Prisoners were initially forced to work in textile and leather workshops. They wore striped tiki fabric uniforms year-round. Women suffered beatings, starvation, and sexual assault, and survival was made even harder because the camp was built on marshy ground. Barracks designed for 250 women housed 2,000. Inmates slept several to a bed. Many had no space on the floor, and there were only 3 toilets for 500 women, all without doors. Wake-up was at 4 a.m., slightly later in winter. Women worked 12 to 14 hours a day with a single 30-minute break. Meals were minimal, bread and water for breakfast and dinner, with a thin soup for lunch. Twice daily roll calls worsened conditions. Guards often forced women to stand outside for hours in all weather, delaying rest or meals. Ravensbrück had a crematorium, so the sick and weak feared complaining. Those unable to work were sometimes sent directly to the furnace. Ravensbrück was also a site of brutal medical experiments. Women were used to test sulfanilamide, a treatment for gunshot wounds. Experimenters would cut skin on the leg, insert shrapnel and gangrene bacteria, then observe the disease progression and test treatment outcomes. Later in the war, experiments included studies on pregnancy and abortion. Prisoners had no consent, no anesthesia, and many died from infection or complications. Ravensbrück also served as the main source of women for brothels established in other Nazi camps toward the end of the war. This was a form of cynical abuse. Being sent to a brothel sometimes meant better food, medical checks, and the false promise of release. Each woman could be responsible for 300 male prisoners who paid to visit these brothels to increase productivity, according to Himmler's own reasoning. Women who became ill or worn out faced the gas chamber. The camp also functioned as a training ground for female guards, who could not formally join the SS but performed auxiliary functions. Notable overseers included Emma Grazer, among others, who earned infamous nicknames from prisoners and were notorious for torture, beatings, and sadistic abuse. Women under their control were often beaten with whips, forced into humiliating tasks, and subjected to arbitrary punishments. Over its 6-year existence, approximately 132,000 women passed through Ravensbrück. Prisoners were beaten, starved, worked to death, poisoned, tortured, and killed in gas chambers. The mass destruction of evidence is one reason so little is known about the camp. Ravensbrück was liberated by Soviet forces on April 30, 1945. At that time, around 2,000 to 3,000 weakened women and children remained in the camp. In 1959, the Ravensbrück National Memorial was established. Original buildings, including the Commandant's office, prisoner cells, crematorium, and access road to Lake Schwetzee, as well as parts of the camp wall, were preserved. Ravensbrück is 80 kilometers, or 50 miles from Berlin, and is accessible by train to Fürstenberg, followed by a short walk or bus ride. Auschwitz became the symbol of one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century, the Nazi industrialized system of mass murder. Yet its beginnings were not initially designed to promise such a horrific outcome. After Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Nazi authorities sought new locations to isolate and eliminate political opponents, members of the Polish intelligentsia, communists, and early Jewish prisoners. They chose the small Polish town of Auschwitz, near Krakow. The site had several advantages for the Nazis: well-developed railway connections, distance from major Western cities, and existing Austro-Hungarian army barracks that could be easily converted into a camp. The decision to establish Auschwitz was made in April 1940, initiated by SS leader Heinrich Himmler. Construction and organization were entrusted to Rudolf Höss, whose name would later become synonymous with one of the most brutal chapters of genocide. By 1942, Auschwitz began its transformation into a death camp, targeting Jews, Soviets, Roma, and other groups the Nazis considered undesirable. Auschwitz evolved from a place of isolation into a factory of death. Auschwitz I, the original camp, was built in the former barracks. It housed administrative offices, the SS headquarters, guard barracks, and medical and experimental facilities. It was here that gas chambers were first tested. In September 1941, several hundred Soviet prisoners were killed with Zyklon B. Auschwitz I also contained the infamous Block 10, where SS Dr. Josef Mengele carried out barbaric medical experiments on prisoners. The most notorious part of the complex was Auschwitz II, Birkenau, located about 3 kilometers from the main camp, built specifically for the final solution. Here were the main gas chambers and crematoria, and trains carrying Jews from across Europe arrived directly at Birkenau. The railway line leading straight to the selection platform became a symbol of the Holocaust. Each arriving train underwent a selection process. SS officers decided in seconds who was fit for labor and who would be sent to the gas chambers. Women with children, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled were almost always sent directly to death. Birkenau contained over 300 barracks, housing tens of thousands of prisoners. Inmates were categorized by gender and age, but most did not remain long. They were often sent immediately to the gas chambers. Those who survived faced forced labor, starvation, disease, and a constant fight for survival. Upon arrival, prisoners were stripped, deloused, shaved, and given striped uniforms with a colored triangle indicating their category: yellow for Jews, red for political prisoners, green for criminals, black for asocials. Their names were erased. They were assigned numbers later tattooed on the arm, especially in Birkenau. From this moment, prisoners ceased to exist as individuals in the eyes of the guards and the system. Days started at 4 or 5 a.m., with roll call in freezing cold or rain lasting 2-3 hours. Minor mistakes could lead to beatings or executions. The workday lasted until dark, involving construction, clearing rubble, factory labor, stone transport, and cleaning. Food was minimal, roughly half a liter of gruel and a piece of bread with margarine or sausage substitute per day. Malnutrition and disease killed tens of thousands. Barracks housed 700 to 1,000 prisoners, with people sleeping in 3 tiers on bare planks, 6-8 per bunk, often sharing space with the dead. Sanitation was nearly non-existent. SS doctors, especially Josef Mengele, experimented on twins and children. Victims were subjected to injections, sterilizations, amputations, and deliberate infection, all without consent or chance of survival. Average life expectancy in Auschwitz measured in weeks or months. Gas chambers and crematoria became the core of Nazi extermination policy. Trains arrived at Birkenau and prisoners were immediately lined up for selection. Officers pointed left for death, right for forced labor. Up to 80% were sent straight to gas chambers, often under the guise of taking a bath. Zyklon B, a cyanide-based chemical, was used in pellet form, dropped into chambers from ceiling openings. Death came in 10-20 minutes from asphyxiation. Each chamber could hold up to 2,000 people simultaneously. Sonderkommandos, prisoners forced to remove bodies, cut hair, and extract gold teeth, lived only slightly longer, being regularly killed to prevent witnesses. Crematoria burned hundreds daily. When capacity was exceeded, bodies were burned in open pits, doused with petrol. Exact numbers are difficult to determine, but historians estimate 1.3 million deaths at Auschwitz, about 90% Jewish. The rest included Poles, Soviets, Roma, and others. On January 27, 1945, the Soviet army liberated Auschwitz. They found unimaginable scenes: emaciated children, piles of charred bodies, mountains of clothing, hair, glasses, and prosthetics, evidence of crimes unprecedented in human history. In 1947, Poland preserved Auschwitz as a memorial museum. Today, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Museum is one of the most visited Holocaust sites. Millions of people visit annually to honor the victims and remind the world of the consequences of hatred. Visitors can see personal belongings of prisoners, clothing, stamps, and possessions, items used by the SS guards who organized mass killings, physical evidence of the Holocaust, empty Zyklon B canisters, gas chamber remnants. The museum is accessible from Warsaw via Krakow, approximately 2.5 hours, with buses from nearby towns. Entry is free but requires advance booking on the official website. Sobibor was not a concentration camp in the traditional sense. It was built for one single purpose: mass murder. From the moment it began operating, Sobibor functioned as an efficient killing machine, where speed, deception, and terror were combined into a perfectly calibrated system. It existed for only about a year and a half, from 1942 to 1943, yet in that short time it became one of the most efficient killing centers of the Holocaust. Jewish deportees arriving by train were immediately sent to the reception area. The extermination zone contained gas chambers, mass burial trenches, and living quarters for Jewish prisoners forced to work there. The gas chambers were disguised as showers. Each chamber could hold 160 to 180 people and was supplied with carbon monoxide gas. The vast majority of Jews brought to Sobibor were murdered immediately upon arrival. They were told they had reached a transit camp on the way to a labor camp and were ordered to shower before continuing their journey. Their clothes, they were told, would be disinfected. Men and women were separated. Children stayed with their mothers. Victims were forced to undress and hand over valuables. Then, under beatings, screams, and warning shots, they were driven at a run toward the gas chambers. At one time, 550 people were forced inside. Once the chambers were filled to capacity, the doors were sealed and gas was released. Within 20 to 30 minutes, everyone inside was dead. Jewish work units known as the Sonderkommando were then forced to remove the bodies, extract gold teeth, and bury the dead. From arrival to burial, the entire process took 2 to 3 hours. While this was happening, other prisoners cleaned the railway cars and the train departed, soon replaced by the next transport of 20 wagons. The efficiency was horrifying. A transport of 2,000–3,000 people could be exterminated in 3 to 4 hours. Everything changed on September 23, 1943, when a transport of Jewish Soviet prisoners of war from Minsk arrived. Among them was Lieutenant Alexander Pechesky, captured in October 1941 and hardened by years in camps. Pechesky was a trained officer with combat experience, organizational skills, and most importantly, an unbreakable belief that escape was possible. He quickly connected with the existing underground group led by Leon Feldhendler, the son of a Polish rabbi. This alliance, Soviet man with military experience and Western European Jews who knew the camp and its guards, became the foundation of the uprising. Pechesky rejected the idea of a simple escape. Storming the gates was suicide. Instead, he proposed a coordinated armed revolt followed by a mass breakout. The revolt began at 4 p.m. according to plan. Several key SS officers, including Deputy Commandant Johann Niemann, were lured into offices and killed with hand tools. But the plan unraveled when one guard accidentally discovered a body and raised the alarm. The armory could not be captured. The prisoners had no choice but to run under fire. Armed with whatever they had, axes, knives, farm tools, and led by Pechesky, the prisoners charged toward the main gate and across the minefields into the surrounding forest. Out of approximately 550 prisoners working in the camp that day, about 320 managed to break through. The rest were killed by gunfire, blown up by mines, or captured and executed in the following days. Pechesky later described the moment of escape. Not a cheer, not a cry of victory burst from our chests. It was a groan, full of pain and hope, a groan of liberation. We ran, stumbling, falling, rising again, not feeling wounds or exhaustion. Behind us was hell. Ahead, the forest, and in it, freedom, however fragile. We did it. We did not let them kill us like cattle. The uprising achieved its main goal. It destroyed the camp itself. Terrified that escapees would expose the truth and inspire resistance, the Nazis decided to erase Sobibor completely. All remaining prisoners were shot. By November 1943, the camp was dismantled. Trees were planted and a farm was built to conceal the site. Himmler ordered Sobibor to be wiped from memory. Of the roughly 320 escapees, only 53 to 60 survived until the end of the war. The rest were killed during manhunts, betrayed by collaborators, or died fighting with partisan groups. Alexander Pechesky crossed the front line, joined a Soviet penal battalion, was wounded, rehabilitated, and after the war lived a long life in Rostov-on-Don, Russia. Today, Sobibor is open to visitors and includes a small museum and memorial. The site lies near the borders of Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. The nearest major city is Lublin, Poland. The former campgrounds can only be reached by private transportation. The drive from Lublin takes approximately 1.5 hours. Sobibor remains a place not only of death, but of one of the most extraordinary acts of resistance in the history of the Holocaust. Treblinka was chosen with chilling precision. From a logistical standpoint, it was almost ideal for mass murder. Located just 80 kilometers from Warsaw and close to the Białystok-Warsaw railway line, the site allowed for the rapid and continuous transport of deportees. These factors were decisive when the camp was constructed in 1942. Notably, the very first structures built were gas chambers, a clear indication that Treblinka was conceived from the outset as a pure extermination camp, not a place of detention or labor. The first transports of Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto arrived on July 23, 1942. Between that date and September 21, 1942, approximately 254,000 Jews from Warsaw were murdered in Treblinka, along with the 112,000 Jews from surrounding areas. Hundreds of thousands more were deported and killed from the Radom and Lublin districts. In total, an estimated 738,000 Jews from the general government and 107,000 Jews from the Białystok district were murdered there. Among the victims were also Jews deported from Slovakia, Greece, and Macedonia. Jews deported from Western and Central Europe often arrived in Treblinka under a carefully staged illusion. They traveled in passenger trains, sometimes in second-class carriages, having purchased their own tickets and carrying large amounts of luggage. They were told they were being resettled. Upon arrival, they saw what appeared to be a normal railway station with ticket counters, signs pointing toward Warsaw, and even an orchestra playing cheerful music. Everything was designed to maintain calm and prevent resistance. The experience of Jews from Eastern Europe was very different. They were transported in sealed freight cars, overcrowded, without food or water, subjected to brutal abuse even before arrival. Yet within minutes of reaching Treblinka, these differences vanished. Regardless of origin, everyone became a victim of the same machinery of annihilation. Treblinka was divided into three main zones: the residential area, the reception area, and the killing zone. In the extermination zone stood a brick building containing 3 gas chambers. A diesel engine, housed in an adjacent annex, produced carbon monoxide, which was fed into the chambers through pipes concealed in the ceiling and disguised as showerheads. Inside the building ran a corridor leading to each chamber, with a second door used for removing the bodies. About 180 meters away, massive burial trenches had been dug. The killing process was refined based on earlier experience in Sobibor, the other Operation Reinhardt camps. When a transport of 50-60 rail cars carrying 6,000-7,000 people arrived, only 20 cars were brought directly into the camp. The rest waited at the station. SS officers ordered the deportees to disembark and informed them that they were in a transit camp where they would shower, have their clothes disinfected, and then be sent to labor camps. The victims were taken to the so-called deportation square. Men were separated from women. Children stayed with their mothers. Women and children were forced to undress in barracks, and women's hair was cut off. Naked and beaten, they were driven into the tube, a narrow, fenced, camouflage passage leading directly to the gas chambers. Once the chambers were sealed, the diesel engine was activated. Within about 30 minutes, everyone inside was dead. As one group was murdered, the next was already being prepared. In March 1943, the Nazis began a systematic effort to erase physical evidence of mass murder. The prisoner uprising was a catalyst for this, and although it was brutally suppressed, around 70 prisoners managed to escape. By July 1943, Treblinka was shut down. The camp was dismantled, the land plowed and reseeded. The goal was total erasure. Today, Treblinka can be reached easily from Warsaw by train or by car, about a 1.5-hour drive. The site now contains a museum, monuments, and a mass grave memorial, standing as silent witnesses to one of the most efficient killing centers in human history. This is far from a complete list of Nazi concentration and extermination camps. There were many, many more. Between 1940 and 1945, approximately 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, about 2/3 of the entire Jewish population of Europe in 1939. By some estimates, around 1 million Jews were killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau alone. The victims included not only Jews, but also people from many other European nationalities. In total, the Nazi regime created more than 20 major concentration and extermination camps, as well as thousands of satellite camps, transit camps, prisoner of war camps, and other detention sites across Germany and the territories it occupied. Every year, on January 27th, the world observes International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Museums and memorials around the globe exist for one reason: to preserve the memory of these crimes and to confront humanity with the consequences of hatred and dehumanization. Remembering is our responsibility.